Good afternoon. I'm Nat Wood. This is 30 Frames a Second. We have a special show for you today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the inimitable Suzanne, Dr. Suzanne Ross.
Okay, greetings, everyone. Nat is absolutely right. It is a very special show, and the show is about the case of Mumia Abu Jamal, the internationally renowned Black political prisoner who spent 30 years on death row in Pennsylvania and is now sentenced to life in prison without parole since 2012. He was nearly executed legally twice in 1995 and 1999, and he nearly died back in 2015 with from hepatitis C, with a legal suit from our wonderful attorneys at that time. Mumia was granted that medicine and was cured. Of course, there are after effects from that. He's suffering still from congestive heart failure, now from congestive heart failure, from cirrhosis of the liver that came from that, and from COVID 19, and also very serious skin disease. While in prison, Mumia has published more than 10 books. He's been sending out thousands of messages. He's by video, by audio, and gives speeches to dozens and dozens of conferences and so on. So Mumia has not been stopped. But I wanted to give you a sense of who our panelists are because they're quite remarkable. Pam Africa, who is on this panel, is the founder and coordinator of the uncompromising international concern Family and Friends of Mumia Abu Jamal. And she is also the Minister of Confrontation of the MOVE organization. Our next remarkable participant is Yahne Ndgo, who's a core organizer of Black Lives Matter in Philly and the Black Alliance for Peace. She helped launch the Philly Radical Collective. She is a liberator with Ubuntu Freedom, and Chief Visionary Officer of Deep Blue Women Company, through which Black and Native femme frontline organizer of that organization. She's also in femme. She's with the frontline organizers and consults with and tightens up organizations, groups, and individuals using liberation lens. Our last speaker is going to be Dr. Ricardo Alvarez, who is Mumia's medical consultant at this stage. And we are so grateful for the role he's played in taking on that incredible challenge. He is a physician and former medical director of a community health center that serves the largely Latinx and immigrant community of San Francisco's Mission District. He has been a MOVE supporter for 25 years. Let me say that Mumia was arrested in 1981, December 9th, 1981, in a scene where a white police officer, Daniel Faulkner, was killed, and Mumia was nearly killed. And he was immediately arrested, even though there were other people suspected of killing the officer who was seen running away, were not apprehended. Mumia was immediately apprehended, beaten mercilessly, so that by the time he got to the hospital, he could barely speak. And the doctor just told him to rest, to be as quiet as he can be. And that's how the case started. A year later, the trial for Mumia started. And the story of that trial is that it was under Judge Albert Sabo. And he was known to have sent more people to death row than any other judge. The majority of them were people of color. And Mumia fit into that pattern. Mumia was found guilty in 1982 and sentenced to death a few months later. So I'm going to stop with that and say that, let me just say that right now the legal case is slightly changed because Judge Leon Tucker, who was the first non-fraternal order of police related judge in this case, a black man, in 2017 ruled that there had been an improper process in a judge in the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania not having recused himself from the case when he had been part of the prosecution in the DA's office in the original appeals process and trial. And now he was ruling on it essentially on his own case, and that it was a conflict of interest. So that brings us today. We have to fight so many people, and Krasner is certainly one of them, the DA, and we would put tremendous pressure on him. And we also have tried to pressure the governor, but we'll go into more of that as we go ahead. And I want to introduce and bring Pam Africa into the picture. And Pam, are you there? Pam Africa?
Yes, I am. I want to move. Okay, all right. So there's several films on this as well. One is Black and Blue. It talks about the era, the Rizzo era, and Mayor Rizzo, and who was also prior to that police commissioner Rizzo. He was known as the Cisco Kid. He was one of the worst Hitler-spitting son of a guns that ever walked the earth. He himself bragged about his cops killing, beating, maiming, illegally locking people up. So the climate was one of a lot of demonstrations that was going on. And, Mumia was covering a lot of that. And there are issues with homelessness, the issues with youth gangs, and, and how they, evolved in the community. Mumia was involved with everything. Mumia was just a 360, journalist, and he covered everything. And one of the amazing things that I found out about Mumia, and that was during the police siege of, our home. Well, you know what? I would not want to say the police siege, because MOVE came out against this entire government, and with Rizzo as the target, because everybody was constantly trying to get rid of, Mayor Rizzo. And he was like Donald Trump. He wanted to run for a third term and was putting that, into practice. And when I met Mumia, when I saw Mumia at first, was at a lot of the police brutality demonstrations, against someone being beaten viciously or someone being murdered. And I would, like most people in Philadelphia, would run home and listen to what Mumia said about it, because Mumia had the ability to put you right in, when you're not there, put you there in a little bit of time. So, like I said, I met him at, police brutality meetings. And then when the situation with MOVE and Rizzo and MOVE, came out with what appeared to be, loaded weapons and caused a situation that went around the world where people was tuned in to watch, because MOVE took a defensive stand on their platform at their home, and was telling people about the beatings, the maimings, and the killing of babies, and not just one. And this was long before May 13th, and the government killed 11 black men, women, and children. This was long before this, and this was before the the situation with Mumia. This was in 1977 when I first had conversation, with Mumia, because I would see him at, different other things. But when it was brought right to our very door behind this year-long confrontation between the Rizzo administration and the MOVE organization exposing the injustice that was happening in the entire community and laying the work of it, right at the feet of this government. Mumia used to come into the area and talking to the youth that was in the area. And please, people, there's a film called The August 8th Confrontation in Philadelphia, was moved because there's a lot to go into. Please look at that film so you can be more detailed about what's going on. About what's going on in the Rizzo area. Please look at Lamar Williams' film, Black and Blue. I can't think of the other brother that did the film, but I can remember Lamar Williams, and it's on YouTube. Black and Blue, the Rizzo era, and the August 8th confrontation, in which Mumia was involved in. But Mumia used to come into the neighborhood, and one thing I liked about him is that he interviewed the children in the area, and because they were very involved, they knew move, and one thing about the children in the area, whether it was white or black, and they were speaking out about what they knew and what it was that they had, handled with Move, during that time, and it was just most respectful, and because Move was respectful of them. But Mumia was capturing, all of this on camera, and right after he was there through the whole August 8th confrontation, because there was a blockade that was put up where food and water supply was cut off, and he was there when the agreement was made, and through Move keeping the stand that Move took, it let the community galvanize and like they had never seen before. And this was a confrontation that Mumia kept on the front, of any paper that he worked for. At that point, he was freelancing for WPE, and he was freelancing for the New Observer, and he was also freelancing between, WHYY, WWDB, these are the college students, WRTI, and he was also working at WHAT AM. And he was a very well-liked person, and he did shots on WDAS as well. So that's when I met him during the Move confrontation. When they put the blockade up, and then the agreement was made by the city not to arrest any Move member for the confrontation that went on between May 20th and, later on in May of the following year. I'm saying, Mumia was there, and then it went into where the blockade came down, and, the city agreed not to, arrest any Move member for not only what went on between that year's siege, and but what went on prior to the agreement that they made, that they would never, ever have Move in court again. They didn't want Move there, and that's a whole nother story. I'll tell you about that later. And but Mumia was there. Then when the city broke this, and because in order for this to happen, and some Move members agreed to leave the city. Some Move members agreed to leave the city, and and they did. And but the city broke the agreement, and by trying to force Move people to come into court and deal with this situation, when they said in agreement, they wanted the lawyers. And Move had lawyers, they'll deal with the lawyers, but they wouldn't deal with Move. But anyway, the city breaks the agreement and brings it on Move, and comes back, and because they were actually embarrassed around the world. Here's this group of black, nappy-headed, and dreadlock wearing, and Move people standing on the platform with weapons, demanding that this government release Move's political prisoners. When that blockade came down, every Move political prisoner was, brought to Move so that you can say, and then they wanted to go inside the house, and they came inside the house. Mumia was there, and with every kind of electronic, things, because they said that Move had a tunnel up under the ground, that Move had stored bombs and stuff, and when they came out, they only had inoperable guns. And also Rizzo, this entire administration had already spent, $2.5 million 6 months before this had came, before the blockade came down. So Mumia is there at all times. And when they wound up going to court, the August 8th siege happened. They came in. They killed a lot of, they killed one police officer. When I'm saying they, I'm talking about the cops. And it was a cop bullet in Faulkner, the police officer. Mumia's covering this. He goes to the police station, to City Hall, where they're having a Frank Rizzo and all his administration after they attacked our home, and police officer Faulkner was killed, and a lot of police officers laid wounded in the street, all from cop guns. And Frank Rizzo fingered out Mumia and was talking about, about these journalists and all that, bleeding heart journalists that, do things and all, really against them and uphold the criminal. This is some of what he was saying. But Mumia was targeted that day. He was targeted that day. And during the trials that came up, Mumia was at every trial. And when they took him move out the courtroom, that's when Mumia started going from the trial, and he was reporting on everything that was said in the courtroom. And he would go up to the prison. He didn't have to go to one prison. Where the women was at was the House of Correction. And, a longer walk after we went there, and was the Department of Correction. He would go there and interview and talk with people there, and then over to Holmesburg. So he had 3 different prisons to go to report and to give back, and this is something that he was doing on his own because he wanted a balance of fairness. And I'm going to show you how fair his coverage was, that when he was arrested himself, and the police investigators went to WHYY and to other places to get the tapes of Mumia, and because they wanted to show that he was biased towards MOVE, and all he wanted to do was report on MOVE. But what they found, he reported on both sides, and and that's the fairness of Mumia. We used to go up to the prison, and when he his wife Wadia, and when he introduced me, to her, and she used to do, him and her used to put on fundraisers, and they would cook spaghetti and stuff, and some of the things that we used to do, and this is before he was 1981. And we used to, go running, in the area, and on just about every day. And then when they, in 1981, early 1981, they had arrested John Africa and several other MOVE members up in Rochester, New York. And we took a van up to Rochester, New York, and Mumia was driving. That's the closest I had been. Nope, that wasn't the closest I had been to him. Going back and forth to the prison, taking a bus and those long trips and going from prison to prison. He went even if I wasn't with him. But the character of this man, the character of him, he wasn't a MOVE member or anything. He was a reporter, who this whole situation just wrinkled him to the core. The fact that this government can kill babies, can take, a MOVE woman, Alberta, Africa, and spread her, have a cop on one leg and another cop on another leg, and a black matron by the name of Robinson repeatedly kicked her in the womb until she miscarried on the floor. Yi Sing Africa head slammed into a glass, thing, and she miscarried. Rhonda Africa was beat so bad. These are in the early 70s, and he's finding out all these things, and then see and be a part of what went on August 8th. That's how he got involved in 1981. And with, like I said, when our coordinator John Africa was captured up in Rochester, New York, with other MOVE members, and we all rode up there, and Mumia did the report from, from there. He wrote everything down, came back, gave it to the Tribune, gave it to other, people, papers that was interested in what was going on. Then later on that year, after the arrest, some of the people that was arrested in Rochester, which was Alberta Africa, Carlos Africa, and Dennis, and they were on trial, and for the May 20th, 1977 confrontation. That's the day that Move came out on the platform with the weapons, right? And they were on trial for that. And Mumia was, covering that trial. And it became a situation. They was before a judge by the name of Kendall Scheuer. Kendall Scheuer had ordered a complete blackout on the trial because what was happening, we was in front of City Hall and we were putting out information and we were packed that courtroom. We had the courtroom full and people all down the halls and stuff waiting to get into the courtroom. So when he gave the news media blackout, Mumia continued to cover what was going on, and Mumia was also. We were outside raising monies and to keep the information flowing, and taking care of Moo's children. Mumia would come out there and. He would shake that jar and help raise money, and he would also speak, about what he saw as a journalist being in that courtroom, and what he saw, when he went up to visit people in the prison, and also became a point that. We had to expose the judge for doing this news media blackout, and what happened, we would fight. The judge would get off his train, because he lived outside the city, and at Penn Station, and we would be there to meet him, and we would just be several feet behind him, letting people know that this is Judge Kendall Scheuer, and what he's doing is a media blackout. He don't want people to know, and this is how 6 million Jews, was part of the strategy of Hitler, how to hide. And his name was Kendall Scheuer, and how to hide, the things that they were doing. And we say our job is to expose it, right? So we would say, Kendall Scheuer, and go behind him and putting out information, which we gathered a crowd, and it still would go right on in the hallway and, up to his office. Pretty soon, he got to the point where he would have police escort him, and all that did was made a bigger crowd, and we would never be close enough to him so it could be misconstrued, and we would constantly, put out the information, and how descriptive I can be, and when it comes to these monsters, and I was very descriptive, and so one day when my sisters was coming out the courtroom, Rhonda and Teresa Africa, both of them was murdered May 13th. When they were coming out the courtroom, they was like the last ones to leave from out the courtroom for the trial. Then they were beaten. They was beaten in the courtroom and they were locked up. We went and got Teresa out. They wouldn't release Rhonda. When we brought Teresa out, she came back 2 days later, and we were still there, protesting, and they locked 2 more supporters up on the 3rd day, and Mumia would be outside, letting know what's going on and reporting about what was happening in the hallway, because it was completely different from what you heard. You heard that Move attacked the guards in City Hall. We attacked them. 2 women attacked all these people with guns and stuff, and they beat them up. They was, the charges that resisting arrest, blah 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 blah. The last day of the beatings in the trial was mine. And they broke my leg. They pulled my sister Teresa Africa arm out the socket. They beat her so bad that it was like, everywhere. And Mumia was the one who came up to the prison and reported on what was going on. In fact, Mumia's very last story was the story that he did called The Evolution of a Revolutionary. And he had a picture of me in the paper with my leg in the cast and, telling the story about, what had happened to me. Then on the night of December 9th, the day of December 9th, 1981, Mumia walking, he's always down Center City, and a cop by and had his finger in a gun, like in a gun part. You can, in a gun, like in a gun thing. And later on that night, and Mumia was brutally beaten, and um, they tried to kill him, and he was accused of shooting and killing a police officer by the name of Daniel Faulkner, and someone else will tell you the rest of the story. But that's how we met, and Mumia was involved at that particular time in putting out the information that was going on in the courtroom and the beatings of MOVE supporters that was out there, the beatings. And when I got my leg broke, that was the last on the street thing that Mumia did for MOVE, and then he wound up in jail 1981. And we have been, because Mumia has been loyal to us as a reporter, as supporter, and we return the same to Mumia. We're very loyal to him, unbreakable.
Thank you, Pam. That was an amazing story, and you could easily use another few hours. I just want to make one minor correction so people aren't confused. The policeman who was killed in that confrontation with MOVE was not the same policeman, obviously, that was killed in the confrontation, the supposed confrontation with Mumia. That was Officer Ramp in the MOVE situation, and it's Officer Faulkner in the Mumia situation. Yahne, can we please have you step up to the plate?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm really just happy to be here with all of you, all of these individuals who really know and understand and appreciate Mumia and what Mumia represents to the larger community and to the world at large. The reality is that right now, with Mumia being in prison, what we have in our midst is our modern day Mandela, our modern day, Martin and Malcolm, individuals who have a massive standing in our larger community because of the immense wisdom and their character. And those individuals also, particularly Mumia, like Mandela when he was in prison for all of that time, who really embody the imprisonment of the spirit of rebellion against oppression, and the systems need to quench the voice of those who speak for justice for all people. Right now, Mumia is extremely important to the many generations, and his importance is intergenerational. But I want to focus on the way that Mumia is important to my generation, Gen X, and the generations that follow. In particular, the movement is not forgetting Mumia. The movement will never forget Mumia. Mumia is an important teacher. He's an important truth teller. But also we know and have watched this system we say we're in the age of intelligence. We've gone through an age of intelligence where information, or an age of information really, where information is spread in a very different way, where we do have these propaganda forces, and these propaganda forces work in order to confuse the masses of people who may not have the time or the wherewithal to do intensive study to be able to understand the reality and have a depth of analysis around the reality of what their situation is. But that is not the reality of today, because people have access to information that is not limited to the propaganda of the current overarching ruling systems. And so people are able to know the truth and to be exposed to the truth. And this has been happening perpetually, where people are given information that is alternative to the status quo narrative that's been put out there, so that there is a massive, much broader community of individuals who are much more informed, not only about things like what's going on in Mumia's case, and even may not even know the specifics of what's going on in Mumia's case, but they're also informed about the larger system and structure that this case is a part of. So we all know at this point that you have individuals who can literally be empowered to tell extreme lies that can create wars that can cause the death, destruction, and murder of millions of people. We watched that going all the way back to 2001 with 911, right? Everybody knows that there were no weapons of mass destruction. And most people know and understand that when the claim for weapons of mass destruction was made, that it was a lie. And there was an entire region that was destroyed as a result of that. And there have been no consequences to any of the people who perpetuated that, right? We see it from a large scale like that, and we see it at the smaller scale where you have individual or small groups of officers, for example, who will go and murder people innocently, do it even on camera, and then may not even get indicted, let alone be charged guilty of a trial. So we already know that this is an injustice system. And then we also know, we were studying in our classes, even if you were in university and you took a Black arts class, rather than taking even if you weren't like a Black history major, you maybe took a Black history class or something, or even just on your own reading books, like reading the autobiography of Angela Davis, reading the autobiography of Assata Shakur. We all know what the environment was in the 70s and in the 80s. We know that even though we still have an extremely racist justice system and an extremely racist police system, that right now the system, there has been, through the work of people like Mumia, through the work of people like the members of MOVE, we have some amount of pressure to hide behind the face of being appropriate, right? But in the 70s and in the 80s, during the time of Rizzo, there was none of that pressure. Rizzo would not only ride up and down Broad Street with his police officers on horses, billy clubbing people in the heads, and then he would brag about it. There was no hiding. He did not make any effort and make any attempt to hide, and in fact, actually communicated that he insisted and expected his officers to be even more aggressive, to be even more violent with the individuals that they were encountering on the street, who were really ultimately just protesting for and fighting for the basic human rights that all individuals are entitled to, that every human being is entitled to. He didn't care about your human rights if you were not falling within a certain category of being predominantly just white. And, at that time, the issues were predominantly about race. And if you were not white, then your rights were not really at all acknowledged by an administration like the Rizzo administration. So that entire framework is a framework that people know, understand, have witnessed and recognized, which enables people to really conclude that there was no way that Mumia was going to be receiving a fair trial. There was no way that that was going to happen. And so when we, at this time, have some transformation in the way that in the optics, right? The change is only in the optics, really. The change, again, is not in the reality of the system. But with the fact that we have a change in the optics where people are claiming that, when people are claiming that now we've got a more just system, you would think that it would be automatic that, just like they've done in other cases, as Suzanne mentioned, that they've gone back and looked at the cases in order to determine whether or not there was any kind of misconduct or bias or anything like that in those older cases, when the overt racism was acceptable. When if we know that today we should be certainly looking at a case like Mumia's. So it's really, really, it's a very simple reality that even if a person, a young person, is not positive about whether or not Mumia is actually innocent or guilty, they can be very positive that there was no fair trial. And at the very least, Mumia should be able to have received a fair trial. And so that's the minimum for people who don't know any information, that they can understand that. But we believe that Mumia is innocent. We understand that a person like Mumia, the same way that it was the same time and the same government that went into the homes of Black Panthers and pulled over Black Panthers and murdered Black Panthers in their sleep, and murdered Black Panthers walking down the street and driving in the cars. It's the same administration, it's the same system that went after Mumia, because individuals who have that kind of brilliant ability to hold the system on trial, that's ultimately what Mumia was doing through his reporting. He was actually taking the system and holding the system accountable by speaking the truth to the people. And when you actually are holding the system on trial, a system that tries to put itself out as being the face of justice, trying to be and claiming that it is the embodiment of justice through its injustices, right? We know that it's a hypocritical system. We know that it's full of contradictions, and we never will believe it. And we do believe Mumia. And so for Mumia, for us, the reality is that we recognize that we deserve to have Mumia returned to us. Even regardless of even if these people on the other side of the system believe that Mumia is guilty, our argument is, so what? Even if you believe that, you know what? Giving us Mumia at this late stage in his life, it does not bring back the 11 people who were murdered when the bomb was dropped on the home of Move in 1985. It doesn't bring their lives back. This apology from the city doesn't bring their lives back. The apology from the city, what keeps happening is that you have these administrations that will, after the fact, acknowledge that they did something wrong, right? Like even Obama, oh, what I did in Libya, that was my biggest regret. It doesn't stop people now from being sold in the streets of this country that had no debt, that was extremely wealthy, well organized, well developed, and positively impacting the entirety of the continent of Africa. That apology doesn't change what was done. After you kill Gaddafi, then you say, oh, it was my mistake. After you kill Saddam Hussein, then you say, oh, actually, no weapons of mass destruction. After you murder these individuals, these 6 adults and 5 children, now you want to come back with an apology? What good does an apology do? That's why members of MOVE say an apology without action is meaningless. The only action that makes any sense is to give it. It's not a trade. It's not a trade, because you can't give us the lives of the people who you destroyed back. You can't give us back Tree Africa. You can't give us back John Africa. There's no value. What they want to do is they want to apologize and say, oh, now that we look at things, they want to wait until Mumia has passed and then say, now that we've looked at everything, we've actually realized that maybe the people were right and maybe Mumia was innocent. And we're saying, we already know it. We don't trust your justice system. We are our own justice system. We have determined that Mumia should not be in that prison. We also recognize that the prisons, and Mumia also teaches us that all the prison system is all completely corrupt. It serves no positive purpose on society. Its only purpose is to make money for individuals who own the prisons, to be a source of deterrent for people to actually push against this oppressive system and to quiet the voices of the powerful voices of people like Mumia. So we don't buy into the system at all anyway. We know that the system is a force of corruption and a force of oppression and repression. So we have our own understanding of justice. And one of the things that is a key component to justice from our court, which is the only court that matters, the court of the people, is that Mumia is innocent and Mumia needs to be returned to us. And this is extremely urgent right now. It's extremely urgent today because Mumia's health is on the line. And so we say we need Mumia home. We want Mumia home now. And if we don't get Mumia home, our interest then is shutting the city of Philadelphia down. And so we will begin immediately to make calls to all the people around the world, anyone who can get to Philadelphia, to come to Philadelphia, so that starting on Mumia's birthday, we need to either be celebrating with Mumia that Mumia was free, or we need to shut the city down until they give us Mumia, because we can't let this keep pushing any longer. This man has been in prison in spite of his innocence for almost 40 years. I'm 49, for the majority, almost 49, the majority of my life, Mumia has been in prison. It is time for him to be released, and we cannot play any more games. And so, and not that we've been playing games, but we have to ramp it up significantly. And so the call is now for all hands to be on deck. We are calling all people from every part of this planet who support this move and support the reality. Mumia is not only about Mumia. I mean, Mumia is important to us. Mumia is extremely important to us. And Mumia also represents and embodies the injustice of this whole system. And so we have to win for him, and we have to win for our entire community, and for the truth of justice, and bring Mumia home alive. And so in order to do that, we have to take action ourselves. We have to take ownership of making it happen. And so we call on all people to join us in Philadelphia. On Mumia's birthday is April 24th. My birthday is the day before. I get to share the birthday weekend with Mumia. What I want for my birthday, the gift that I want for my birthday is Mumia to be home. And if at the very least, for us to be doing the extreme level of work in order to bring Mumia home and to let the system know that we are not playing any games. So let us all join in Philadelphia, starting the weekend of April 23rd, April 24th, April 25th. All of us need to be in Philadelphia, and we need to shut the city down until we have Mumia. We need to shut the city down for the weekend if we already have them, because they did what was right already and they brought Mumia home, and we can celebrate that together. And if Mumia is not home by his birthday, then the city of Philadelphia should not function again until he comes home.
Thank you, Yahne. Thank you, Yahne. Our next speaker, Ricardo, Dr. Alvarez, are you ready?
First, I want to begin by thanking the other speakers. And I want to say that it is impossible to speak about Mumia's health without fundamentally understanding that we are discussing the health of someone in the context of imprisonment. We're discussing the health of someone in the context for which there is compelling evidence of the attempt of this state to assassinate him, to kill him. It's in this context in which we discuss health. We're discussing his health in the context of a massive incarceration that has occurred over the last 40 years, for which the United States has the highest rates of incarceration in absolute numbers and percentage of any country by far. So this is a historical moment in which Mumia's health in incarceration is in a state of racism in the attempt of the state to execute him. Why do I introduce this discussion in this context? It's because the discussion of healthcare in the state of incarceration cannot be removed from that context. Now, my training as a medical sociologist brings me to an understanding of healthcare and the distortions of our existing healthcare system. And it also brings me to understanding that in some ways, Mumia, in his professional capacity as a journalist, is trying to tell a story. And in some ways, in my capacity as a physician, I have a responsibility to be in relationship to those that we serve with a deep understanding of their story, their walk on earth. And to speak to Mumia and to speak of Mumia is to speak of someone who is essentially a spiritual warrior. He is in the same path of the Nelson Mandelas of the world, who are imprisoned because they speak truth to power with such clarity. And they also, and this is why I think the state seeks to assassinate him, because they speak with love. It is impossible to speak about Mumia's life without speaking about how deeply he speaks with a message of love. Now I'm going to step back and say, after that context is brought to bear, that we have some real medical issues that have to help shape and define the urgency of our actions. Mumia suffers from cirrhosis of the liver, which is an advanced disease of the liver resulting from hepatitis C. It is well documented in court that that cirrhosis resulted from him being denied direct acting antiviral medications that cure hepatitis C. Because Mumia went to court, he was able to force the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections to grant him that medication, as well as many other prisoners who suffered from hepatitis C. So we should be clear that he aligned with prisoners, black, brown, white, who all came together from a place of compassion to say, when the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections says that their standards for the access to this medication are you essentially have to be dying, when they basically say we are going to openly deviate from what the proper standards of medical care are by professional societies and deny these admittedly expensive medications based on their criteria, it was challenged, and Mumia's health then impacted other prisoners. This is emblematic of Mumia's life. So when we speak about addressing his healthcare matters, it also has impact on others. But not only did he suffer because of the neglect of administering medications for his hepatitis C, not only did he suffer cirrhosis, it is well documented that in 2015, he received a series of medications, steroids, which are known to increase sugar levels. And he had a remarkably high sugar level, which was documented and ignored. And the result of the administration of repeated steroids was it induced him into a diabetic ketoacidosis, into a coma, for which he had to be hospitalized in the intensive care unit. This was a direct harm that resulted from a practice in which there was not proper attention and diligence to both the side effect of a particular medication and the monitoring of a lab. All of that is well documented by a brilliant hepatologist who reviewed Mumia's medical records. Not only has he suffered from these conditions, but he also suffers now from coronavirus. This was documented. He'd been receiving repeated testing, and it was then documented in the most recent admission at the end of February. And in that hospitalization, it was also documented that he suffers from congestive heart failure. Okay, now we have to pause. When we speak about congestive heart failure, people will think, oh, well, people have heart attacks, they live for years, it's just a heart problem. But congestive heart failure is a very significant diagnosis because, as the name suggests, the heart is failing, meaning that the capacity to effectively pump blood forward is impaired and you get a backup of fluids. The prognosis for a general population after 5 years is that 50%, half of people with this diagnosis, will die in 5 years. But now we have to step back and pause and examine the reality of what it means to live under the conditions of mass incarceration in the United States. It is already well documented that there is a phenomenon which makes sense to all of us called accelerated aging. Under these conditions of stress, when someone is 50 years old, they effectively have a body physiologically of 60 or 65. Mumia is already over 60 years old. He's 66 years, I believe. He's going to be 66, I think, in April. So we see now that it's imperative that we mobilize to free Mumia from these conditions. But I want to speak to one other matter. And I know I want to be respectful of the time, but I want to speak to one other matter that I think is very important. There's a form of harm that exists within the nature of prison medicine, incarceration medicine. And we want to be cautious because people will say, oh, you know, you can't get these medications in prison. They could give him the most expensive medications in prison, but it's in a context in which Mumia and other prisoners have a valid concern around their trust that they're receiving medications that are helping them. And that trust is violated when we as professionals assault their sense of their own security. And we see this happening within the legal realm when Larry Krasner reviews the summary of his case. Now, there's so much information, it can sometimes be confusing around what's really happening. But let's use, through the lens of a medical provider, one narrow lens to examine how racism operates and perpetuates trauma. When Larry Krasner presents his brief on February 3rd and writes that Officer Faulkner was put in a police van and rushed to Jefferson University Hospital, when the police attempted to handcuff the defendant and place him in a police wagon to transport him to the hospital, he violently resisted. So this is now the progressive DA for which he has the facts of the case before him, summarizing to say that Mumia, who was shot and had a bullet through his lungs and whose head was rammed into a pole, he violently resisted arrest. That's an assault on our own consciousness. And this is the kind of perpetuation of trauma that exists. He goes on to say that he continued to struggle against the officers when they subsequently brought him inside the hospital, the same one in which doctors were attempting to save Officer Faulkner's life. We should note that Mumia arrived fully 30 minutes later than Officer Faulkner. He was dumped on the floor of Jefferson Hospital, right at the entrance. We have the testimony of two physicians who acknowledge, one, Regina Cudemo, saying that they saw an officer lift their leg, bring it down, heard Mumia moan, and then she was told by the officers to go away. The attending physician was Dr. Coletta, who's provided testimony that he was with Mumia that whole time. The officers carrying the defendant, he refused to walk. This language is foul, racist, violent, traumatic language of someone who has suffered their bodily harm. Temporarily was placed him on the floor of the lobby next to the entrance of the emergency room. Now, as a medical provider, I was shocked to hear that this is the description of Mumia's entry point into his medical care. Here's the part that is really assaulting our own senses and mobilizes to free Mumia and understands the distillation of this case in relation to his innocence. You had then an officer who literally wrote, Officer Wakeschel, "The Negro male said nothing."
Dear sisters, brothers, comrades, and friends, and family on the move, how can I thank you? These, my words, can hardly measure the flood of love that you have radiated on my behalf recently. I am almost without words, but I'll try. Thank you, Wadia. Thank you, Pan Africa. Your support from Philadelphia to France, from points across the nation, and literally around the globe, have pulled me from a prison cell and placed me in a hospital room to be treated for a condition I didn't know I had. In the age of pandemic, now, indeed, deeply doubted pandemic, as of January 2021, over 300,000 prisoners have tested positive for COVID-19. Imagine that. In a cell, trying to breathe with a weight pressing on your chest. Imagine an elder man or woman, or even a young person. Because yes, we are also in an age of mass incarceration, which day by day increases its infliction upon the elderly, struggling unsuccessfully to breathe, to walk, to be. I thank you all for reaching out, and I urge you all, let our mission be abolition. I love you all. Thank you again from the bottom of my heart. From Imprisoned Nation, this is Mumia Abu Jamal.
These commentaries are recorded by Prison Radio.